Hey folks, and welcome. It's Dr. Evans here with a strategy short. These are just brief videos that are meant to review and then comment on our never-ending search for the best of the best instructional practices. We're talking about the no doubt about it, talk to the hand, best practices that our teacher practitioners use each and every day in our classrooms to move achievement for all students. Now remember, our only goal here is to learn from each other, to study best practice, to push our thinking a little bit, to challenge our assumptions, and as always, to celebrate and honor the great work of our teachers in the classroom that are making a difference for our children and families each and every day. So let's get right to our topic for today, which is right up here. Is explicit instruction useful to our students? It's a great topic. It'll take a little unpacking, so let's jump right in. Now, before we talk about today's topic, I'd like to begin here so we can kind of just situate the discussion today and give our talk a little bit of context. What you're looking at here is sort of a summary graphic to guide our discussions. It's meant to present a summary of 12 of the key classroom steps or classroom actions that are typically in place when we observe our best teachers in action. These are consistently supported both by research and by observation in our classrooms, and I'll try to explain each one of these one at a time via these strategy shorts. So if there's one of them you're unfamiliar with or that you disagree with, that's perfectly fine. Just jump over and listen in on that video. Maybe we'll have something to learn together. Now let me orient you for just a minute to this visual. It has 12 distinct steps or actions that typically lead to student mastery of a skill or a concept. But not all teachers use these steps in the same order, nor do all teachers start at the same place. So they're not meant to really represent a beginning and end, but really the cycle of mastery learning. Also, if you don't like the title, the name of one of these, or maybe you refer to it as something else, that's perfectly fine. Just swap it out. I don't really get too much caught up in terminology because that tends to change over time in our profession and really is dependent upon your community and your region. And so that's perfectly fine. With that being said, let's jump over to the next slide. Now, this is where we get into the meat of our conversation today. Let's go ahead and just answer the question I posed at the beginning, which is explicit instruction useful to students? And the answer to that, in my opinion, is yes. I think it's supported by both research and what our best teachers are doing to move achievement for students. So the idea of every day in every class, for the most part, there's a time for teacher-led instruction. Whether you call that explicit instruction or direct instruction, whatever you call it, it absolutely has an important place in our schools. Now, to have it be successful, what I've done here on this slide is I pulled out 3 considerations that I think really have to be in place for it to be successful, and I ask you to think about it. One is, I'm a big believer in acceleration over remediation, just meaning that I think we need to push kids, and I think they'll rise to that occasion. High expectations for kids that they can actually do grade level content. So first things first, do you as a teacher know what the standard is, the critical content that we have to cover, and what grade level content is? And then 2, can we get that knowledge of that expectation over to the students? And that requires, number 2 on this list of considerations, some sort of success criteria, I think. Some sort of visual representation of what it is to be good at whatever it is you're teaching. So the students can look at this thing. It could be an example. It could be an exemplar. The idea of worked examples or exemplars of what you expect grade level content outcomes to look like in kid-friendly versions, I think is very, very important. And 3rd on this list of considerations is the proper scaffolds, right? How do we help students who are doing the work, but they're not meeting that grade level expectation? I think that's where anchor charts come in. Maybe a help station, a place where students can go over, get out of their seat for a minute, go get some additional guidance, then come back and try again. That can be done both in a physical sense and a virtual help station, so students don't always have to go to the teacher. So those are some things to think about if we're going to have great explicit instruction. And the last thing I want to talk about today on this topic is your monitoring of the student's actions. And so that really is just the pacing of explicit instruction needs to be quick, not too quick, but yet not so long and involved that we lose students' attention. So checks for attention and checks for understanding, making sure all students have an opportunity to respond. These are just some of the things I'd ask you to consider. So yes, I think it's a great part, a very important part of what we do in our schools, and I hope you agree. So before we end today's strategy short, I left you 2 or 3 things to ponder as we leave today. Maybe they're questions you can think about, reflect upon, maybe take back to your school and talk about with your colleagues, because I think that reflection and that conversation will lead to deeper learning. So the questions I'm posing are, can students learn in the absence of direct instruction? Well, I think technically the answer to that is yes, of course. You could learn things without the teacher guiding you. But we know teacher guidance is critical. So what's the right balance between inquiry and hands-on learning and project-based learning and teacher-led directive learning? And so that's something for us to continue to talk about. In what place in the lesson is explicit instruction best suited? And again, I think the typical answer, which I would agree, is near the beginning of the lesson. And yet, I've seen many lessons and lesson types where it doesn't come at the very, very beginning. The 5E model, which is just one model of lesson planning, allows for students to what? Engage and explore a little bit before we get into teacher-led directed instruction. I think that's great. A third thing I'd like you to think about is, how do I balance explicit teacher-led instruction with student practice and exploration? Right, where students get their hands dirty a little bit. We want to have a balance of those two things in any classroom. And certainly we want to have more time for students to get working in the content, discussing the content, and less time with the explicit instruction. So you'll have to think about just the right balance so we have learning going on and we don't lose engagement. So those are some things I'd ask you to think about as you go back to your schools. Now, I like to end these strategy shorts with one declarative statement specific to what is best practice presently in our industry, supported by both research and the observation of our best teachers in practice. And around explicit instruction, I offer you this thought. Significant learning only occurs when the teacher knows very clearly what the grade level standard or outcome is. When they, the teacher, can articulate to students what it looks like, and when the students can measure themselves against that standard. I offer that up for your consideration. Whether you agree or disagree, I hope it informs your practice presently and in the future. So I offer you this final quote for your consideration. Be strong for me even when I want to concede. Have faith in me even when I no longer believe. And when you can, step aside so that I may lead. Here's wishing you a great rest of your school year. I hope that whatever came out of our conversation, that you have some fresh perspectives and maybe are willing to try a new idea. And please tune in again to our strategy shorts and continue to grow in your practice. Thank you for joining me.